Welcome to Ahead of the Curve podcast. I'm Ashish. I'm a second year undergraduate student of economics at the Madras School of Economics. And today I have with me the president of the Center for Social and Economic Progress in Delhi. He's also the founder of Indicus Analytics. He is a one of a kind entrepreneur come economist. And he's also an environmental evangelist. Dr. Laveesh Bhandari, it is truly a pleasure talking to you today. So let's first start with your work, sir. What led to the foundation of Indicus Analytics? Why did you start? First leave America after finishing your PhD in Boston University and then return to India?
So first, I left the United States, and at that time, very few people used to come back. Was essentially because I couldn't think of more exciting issues to work on than in India. I thought that India posed the greatest challenges for anyone doing economics research. So that was the primary reason. And the second reason was that whenever I imagine my life, I just always is a picture of India right there.
Yes.
So that was the connect was, I think, too strong for me to beat.
Okay. And so what led? I mean, why did you?
So when I came back, I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Okay.
I knew for a while that I didn't want to do research.
Okay.
So I went around talking to many people, and some people did give me jobs in the corporate sector. And when the time came, I got a job in some banking or some financial sector firms, and I thought, well, I can't wear a tie.
Okay.
So I said, this cannot be my life. So that led me to join a think tank, which was NCAER at that point in time. And I worked there for about 6 or 7 years, which was definitely a very exciting phase of my life. But after about 5.5 years, I started to feel jaded, and I felt that I needed more excitement in my life. And what better way than to start your own?
Oh, nice. You're also a person who's engaged in the policymaking apparatus. So, I mean, as someone who has been conventionally educated, both in India and in America, do you notice any, let's say, discordance in the way policy people involved in policy approach economics as compared to just theorists, even though they're operating the same piece of knowledge and information?
So yes, of course, academic work is very different from policy-oriented work. Not that people in academia do not do policy, and not that people who are working on policy don't do some level of academic work. I mean, there is some amount of fluidity there. But what really happens is that the orientation of the policy person is to bring in a whole lot of different factors that impact a particular situation. So, for instance, if you're working on poverty,
Yes.
you'd of course look into poverty issues and what leads to poverty, but you'd also bring in institutions, laws, political economy, and a whole lot of other, sometimes even social factors that go into that vicious cycle that creates poverty. A pure economist would try and identify the core underlying problem and go deeper and deeper into that one or two classes of problems. And of course, these two worlds are complementary to each other. You cannot, a policymaker or a policy economist or a policy professional would not be able to do what he does without the backing of core research having happened in academia.
But what is that realization point wherein you notice that there is a difference between engaging in approaching economics through the lens of policy? What is that realization point for anyone who wants to engage themselves in policy?
So in my case, it was the first study I did back in India. I just realized that I came with the issue that I need to solve this particular problem. I remember the study was on public sector reform. And I was working with a very, very established known economist called Onkar Goswami at that time.
Okay.
And then in the process of doing this, I realized that what was really important was to actually bring things together, because you can't just solve the public sector problem without looking into institutions, without looking at industrial sectors, without looking at a whole gamut of factors. And for me, it was but natural that this was the space that was for me.
Nice. Which leads me to my next question. So what is the approach that is followed at the Center for Social and Economic Progress?
So first, this CSEP is a very different think tank. It's a think tank that is multidisciplinary.
Yes.
And that's a rare thing in India. There are, of course, others as well, but we are amongst the largest. Perhaps we are the largest and perhaps also the youngest multidisciplinary think tank. We have people who work on foreign policy and security studies. We have people who work on economics, people who work on engineering issues, especially on energy and environment. We have a lot of lawyers. We have people who worked in the government. We have people who worked in academia. We have people who worked in the consulting sector, in the corporate sector. So it's a whole international institutions. So there's a whole range of expertise which is there available.
Very eclectic.
Yes, absolutely, very eclectic. So that's one major difference. The second is that there's a complete focus on scholarship. So even though we are not academia in the classic sense, we are a think tank and who need to be very well aware of what's really happening around all the time. It's a different kind of scholarship that happens, but it is scholarship nevertheless. We take a lot of care to review to our own work. We take a lot of care to ensure that only the most credible data and methods are used. We take a lot of care to be non-political, unbiased, completely clinical in our approach. So it is a very, very, I think it's a unique think tank in India and perhaps across the world.
Truly, I think India, is, I think, beyond your conventional think tanks, I think there a truly multidisciplinary and intradisciplinary sort of space is lacking, and I think this is filling in that gap.
That's correct.
And with respect to data development, Indicus Analytics also focuses in that respect, right?
Yeah, so Indicus no longer exists.
Yes.
That entity has been absorbed by the entity that bought it, which was Nielsen. But yes, and there also, I mean, when we started off, I thought I was going to do some studies.
Yes.
When you start off a firm and a startup, you really don't know where you're going to eventually reach. You just do whatever makes most sense, which I did, and. Over a period of over the first 2 or 3 years, I realized that there was a big gap on credible data availability for not just people in outside the government, but also people within the government. Okay. There was data challenges for people in academia. So therefore, we started to, in a sense, create our own data. We started to what are called to estimate. Things like income distributions, GDP at the district level, all using data that was available in the public domain. We used at that time a lot of AI, what you call AI now. That time we used to call it neural networks. Wow. And so we used a whole lot of the latest technologies to be able to do that. And lo and behold, it was one of the most successful startups in this space.
Wow, you were truly advanced. You were truly ahead of the curve back then.
We were.
Amazing. So now, as things have evolved, what do you think are the current economic sensibilities and sensitivities of those who are directly involved in policy work?
So I think it's obviously a far more complex world.
Yes.
Very complex world. Also, what used to work in the past no longer works now. A lot of the economic theories which we know inherently are correct. At the same time, given the way things have evolved globally, just cannot work.
Yes.
The classic one, for instance, is free trade. It's just not going to happen to work the way we thought it could. So in such situations, how do you generate faster growth, more inclusive growth, and of course more sustainable growth? Those are serious challenges. So the major difference is that pure theoretical work now doesn't work. You have to be far more tactical, far more real-time, far more responsive to the latest situations, and far more fluid. So I can give you one set of policy prescriptions today, and tomorrow when Mr. Trump announces something, then I may have to give you a completely opposite set of policy prescriptions. So you need to have a lot of fluidity in policy making and policy advice as well.
It's dynamism. It's almost explosive.
Absolutely. The same thing about the environment.
Yes.
A lot of things are changing, and very rapidly as well. And we need to be fully cognizant of the fact that things, in some sense, are worsening very, very rapidly, far more than we had expected. So we again need to be far more responsive to those changing dynamics.
I think one of the major unique approaches to economics is to approach taxation through the lens of environmentalism. You call yourself an environmental evangelist, so you're extremely engaged with of sort of taking out the bad aspects of economic activity and freeing it from the negative aspects, and thereby keeping the economy greener and cleaner. So in that respect, I mean, how do you think taxation has helped, and what is your opinion on some of the unique taxes in our country, and what are your perspectives on the efficacy of tax and
before taxation, I'd like to back up of what got me where I am.
Yes.
So there was a time when, after I had exited from my firm, for a while I did essentially nothing but roam around the Himalayas and read books and stuff that you all want to do as a successful entrepreneur. So I did that for a while, and in the process, I chanced upon the environment, and I started to feel very deeply about it.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time in nature, and that. I mean, we're all nature lovers in some sense, but I felt a deep sense of connect. So my first step back into this whole space was actually I became, in my mind at least, an environmental activist. And but as I started to go deeper and deeper into this, I realized that the environmental problem can only have an economic solution.
Okay. Interesting.
So for me, this was a sense of discovery that yes, there is an environmental challenge. To be able to solve it, you can't just mandate solutions. You can't just say stop all thermal power. You can't say stop all plastics, etc. It will lead to complete disaster in many different domains, right? So to have a structured approach, you needed some mechanism, and economics gives you that mechanism. So that was the starting point. And of course, as we all know who studied economics, that the environmental problem is a problem of externalities.
Yes.
Okay. And in externalities, as again, something that almost all students of economics knows, that whoever creates the problem needs to pay for it. Right? That's where taxation comes in. That you need to design a taxation regime that would, at least in principle, direct the costs of this problem to the people who are creating it. And that essentially helps you get change towards a more cleaner, greener economy.
Amazing. So the insights derived from this, can this also be applied to non-environmental problems?
Well, that's the problem that many people have with economists. I mean, we tend to get into every space. But yes, in some sense, yes, there are many different kinds of insights. But in a sense, I think there's one principal rule. Whoever creates a problem does need to pay for it. I think that is the underlying rule, which you have in judiciary. Also, in a sense, tends to go by that rule, right? And so on.
Because you were speaking of fluidity and the dynamism that needs to be sort of be at the forefront of decision making. How do you think economic theory is being received, not being taught? I'm specifically focusing on how it's being received by the students in your era as compared to mine.
So there's one big difference.
Yes.
At least the students that I see now, I think, are far more aware and far sharper than and perhaps that also gives them a certain level of impatience, and which we couldn't afford at that time. So we were forced. We didn't have that many options. Our exposure to global issues was lesser, of course. It wasn't that it wasn't there; it was lesser. The way our seniors dealt with us was also very different. They were, in a sense, also by seniors I mean the faculty and so on, were less. How do I say? Were less open than I feel that sometimes that today's faculty tend to be. But that also enabled in us a certain sense of patience that you have to wait it out, which you don't see now. No. But I think they both have their pros and cons. I think all the solutions that we need to implement will be implemented by your generation. So we have no option there.
Right. Well, and so if we were to, let's say, intersperse ourselves with different kinds of environmental theories, in the sense that because India is incredibly diversified, its sensibilities are also diversified. So, and I've noticed that most of the jobs related to economics is highly concentrated in Delhi, where you often run research and other things. That's the main sort of apparatus, and it's a little more dispersed across.
India. What happens with think tanks?
Yes,
they tend to be where capital cities are. That's a global phenomenon. However, it's not the case that they are only where capital cities are. I mean, by capital, national capitals. Yes. They're also around state capitals. I mean, you have some great think tanks in Chennai as well. Yes. You have them in Pune, you have them in Ahmedabad, you have them in Hyderabad, some great ones, and so on. So there are very good think tanks around. But yes, the largest number predominantly would be in Delhi. But I feel that with time, as our economy matures, the need for think tanks would grow more and more in different states. So I see this growing at the state level as we come along, and I can already see some of that. The biggest problem, of course, with think tanks is that of funding. So you would also need the industry or other private avenues who would be able to fund efforts at the state level.
And because of this, is there, let's say, a common consensus approach towards environmentalism and economics in Delhi? Because it also faces environmental issues. Or is it also different?
No. Delhi has many different conversations happening. Many different conversations. Of course, the government would have a single one. Of course, that's the nature.
Amongst think tanks.
But there are many different. There would be some who would be a bit more activist. There would be some like ours who would be a bit hands off. And there would be yet others that would be far more conservative, and so on. So there is definitely a variety. A variety of conversations, of thoughts of that. However, I feel there needs to be more variety.
Okay.
Because it's only when you have a large variety to great ideas come up through that churn. If everyone is the same, then you can't have an argument. You can't have an argument, or at least a debate, a back and forth. We don't get stretched enough. So I think it's great to have different conversations.
And at the National Council of Applied Economic Research, how was that experience like for you personally?
Oh, that time, it was a brilliant experience. I mean, I was before that working in a hedge fund in the United States.
Amazing.
I was pricing what are called derivative securities, and I absolutely using algorithms and so on, and I absolutely hated it.
Okay.
So when I came back, I was working on development issues. And to me, who was trained as an economist, that was far richer, something which was far real than the notions of whether something is priced at $4 or $4.02. So to me, that was something real. But I think at that time, there was also a great collection of people that would just come together there at that time. There were people working on agriculture, on industry, on energy, on infrastructure, and it was a great time. Those 5-6 years were definitely one of the more interesting of my life.
Thanks. Would you recommend that for any aspiring, let's say, economist to go into research first and then to a think tank? What would be the trajectory that you'd outline personally? Because economics is, I think, a little more nebulous in terms of...
Yeah, it's very difficult to say what is the right thing. To a very large extent, it depends on who are the small cohort of people you end up working with. But I think working in a think tank which has diverse set of issues that works is always good, because then you get exposed to many different thoughts, many different ways, many different people. And you end up building a whole set of relationships which then help you later on.
And if there's one word that you'd like to sort of end this podcast with in terms of giving advice to future economists, what would that be?
Go for it.
Just go for it.
Yeah.
So thank you. It was truly a pleasure interacting with you.
Thank you, Ashish.
I hope to have you again sometime soon.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.